Royalty is bound by blood, but sometimes that blood runs too close. To protect thrones, empires, and sacred lines of inheritance, royal families turned inward, marrying cousins, nieces, even uncles. What they called duty, others called taboo. These were not just weddings, they were dangerous experiments in legacy and biology. Here are 6 royal marriages, bound by blood. Before we begin, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support helps us uncover and tell the most compelling stories from history. Now let's begin. 1. Queen Victoria and Prince Albert, first cousins' marriage. She ruled over the largest empire the world had ever seen, the British Empire. He was a quiet German prince with a sharp mind and deep convictions. Together, they were the heart of the Victorian age, but they were also first cousins, and their union, though loving, would seed a genetic curse across Europe. This is the story of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert. Victoria was born into chaos. 5th in line to the throne at birth, few believed she'd ever rule. But after a series of royal deaths and scandals, she became queen at just 18. Independent, strong-willed, and untested, Victoria quickly found herself surrounded by advisors, courtiers, and potential suitors. But there was only one man who truly moved her, Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha. Albert, born just a few months after Victoria, was the son of her mother's brother, making him her first cousin. He was everything Victoria was not: reserved, scholarly, disciplined, a man of ideas, not indulgence. He believed in duty, reform, and the power of monarchy to shape society. She fell in love almost immediately. And in 1840, Victoria made history again by proposing to him. Their marriage was more than a match, it was a partnership. Victoria adored Albert. She relied on him, wrote to him constantly, and called him her angel. They shared a passion for music, science, and family. They redefined royal marriage, not as cold strategy, but as domestic affection. But it was also a marriage of blood. Their shared ancestry meant that any genetic weaknesses would be reinforced. And in their case, they were. Victoria carried a rare mutation for hemophilia, a life-threatening disorder that prevents blood from clotting. They had 9 children, but it was their son Prince Leopold who would show the full consequences of that inheritance. Leopold bled easily, bruised badly, and any small injury could be fatal. At age 30, after a simple fall, he died from internal bleeding. Doctors were puzzled. Courtiers were silent. The press was kept away. Hemophilia was virtually unknown, but within a generation it became known by a chilling new name: the royal disease. Victoria's daughters unknowingly carried the gene across Europe. Her granddaughter Alexandra married Tsar Nicholas II of Russia. Their son, the young Alexei, inherited the disorder. That secret would drive Alexandra to desperation and into the arms of the mystic Rasputin. In a tragic irony, a genetic accident from a cousin marriage helped spark the fall of the Romanovs. Victoria never understood the full cost of what she passed on, but she never stopped encouraging cousin marriages. To her, it was about unity, about keeping royal blood pure. In truth, it made that blood dangerously fragile. Her legacy was an empire, but her private legacy was a royal illness that echoed from palace to palace, throne to throne. Queen Victoria and Prince Albert loved each other deeply, but their marriage, one of the most famous in history, was also one of the most tragic. It wasn't just love that bound them, it was blood, and that blood would ripple through Europe, with a cost no crown could prevent. 2. Philip II of Spain and Anna of Austria, uncle and niece marriage. He ruled the vast Spanish Empire, an empire where the sun never set. She was barely 20, the product of royal design and dynastic obsession. They were uncle and niece, and their marriage, sanctioned by power, not morality, was just one in a long line of Habsburg unions that pushed bloodlines to their limits. This is the story of Philip II of Spain and Anna of Austria, a royal marriage between uncle and niece that would echo in the fragile legacy of the Spanish throne. Philip II was the most powerful monarch of the 16th century. Son of Emperor Charles V, he inherited an empire that stretched from Spain, Portugal, and the Low Countries to vast territories in the Americas, Italy, and the Philippines, which were named in his honor. He ruled the Spanish Empire, a superpower of wealth, Catholicism, and military might. But Philip was more than a ruler. He was also the ultimate Habsburg, part of a dynasty notorious for marrying close relatives in order to preserve power. By the time he turned 40, Philip had already buried 3 wives. His third wife, Elizabeth of Valois, had died young, leaving him heartbroken and without a surviving male heir. He needed a new bride, a young, fertile one, and he didn't have to look far. Enter Anna of Austria. She was the daughter of Philip's sister Maria and the Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian II. In other words, his niece, their shared grandfather, Charles V, the very man who had split the Habsburg Empire between the Spanish Habsburgs, headed by Philip II, and the Austrian Habsburgs, led by Ferdinand I. To outsiders, it was shocking. To the Habsburgs, it was tradition. They believed marrying within the family protected their dynastic blood, preserving the divine right to rule. Anna was 20. Philip was 43. Despite the age gap and the fact he had watched her grow up as a child, Philip proceeded with the marriage. The Pope granted dispensation. The courts prepared a lavish ceremony. And in 1570, uncle married niece. Surprisingly, by all accounts, it was a happy marriage. Philip found comfort in Anna's youth and simplicity. She soothed his melancholic temperament. He called her my joy. She was obedient, pious, and bore him children, finally producing the long-awaited heir, Philip III. But this apparent success hid a darker truth. Each child of this union carried the compounded genes of generations of intermarriage. And though Philip III lived to inherit the throne, he was sickly, indecisive, and intellectually limited. This was not an accident. It was the slow, inevitable result of Habsburg inbreeding. By the late 1500s, nearly every royal marriage in the Habsburg line was between close relatives. First cousins, uncles, and nieces, even double cousins. The infamous Habsburg jaw, a protruding chin and misaligned bite, became the physical marker of this genetic bottleneck. But worse was yet to come. Anna and Philip's grandson, Charles II of Spain, would inherit the full weight of this bloodline, and with it a body and mind so broken he could barely rule. It was the genetic collapse of a dynasty, set in motion in part by this very marriage. Philip II believed he was strengthening his empire by keeping the bloodline pure. But in binding his family so tightly to itself, he planted the seeds of decline. He ruled the Spanish Empire at its peak, but his dynasty would fall, childless and fractured, barely a century later. A marriage between uncle and niece, a dynasty obsessed with blood, and a reminder that what keeps a crown secure can also make it crumble. 3. Charles II of Spain and Maria Anna of Neuburg, the offspring of an uncle-niece marriage. He was born into gold-laced cradles, surrounded by portraits of emperors, saints, and kings. But Charles II of Spain was no ordinary monarch. He was the product of 2 centuries of royal inbreeding, so concentrated, so unnatural, that his very body became a symbol of decay. His marriage to Maria Anna of Neuburg would be his second, and like everything in Charles's life, it was haunted by desperation, dysfunction, and decline. This is the tragic union of Charles II and Maria Anna, a marriage that was less about love and more about the last breath of a dying dynasty. Charles was born to King Philip IV of Spain and Mariana of Austria. They were uncle and niece, married to preserve the Habsburg bloodline that had ruled the Spanish Empire for over a century. But that purity came at a horrific price. Charles inherited a grotesque concentration of genetic defects. His jaw was so deformed, now called the infamous Habsburg jaw, that he could barely chew food. He had trouble walking, speaking, and learning. He suffered frequent seizures and may have had hydrocephalus. At age 4, he was declared king, but for most of his life, he was treated like a fragile relic, hidden from view, whispered about by courtiers, and manipulated by factions. The people called him El Hechizado, the bewitched, believing he was cursed. In truth, he was simply a child born of too much shared blood. Charles's first marriage to Marie Louise of Orléans had ended in tragedy. No children, and a queen who died young, possibly of poison or grief. The Spanish crown was in crisis. No heir meant the throne could fall into foreign hands. So Charles was married again, this time to Maria Anna of Neuburg, a German princess from a famously fertile family. Her sister had birthed 23 children. Maria Anna was chosen for one reason, to produce an heir and save the Spanish Empire. But what she found in Madrid shocked her. Charles was incapable of consummating the marriage. He was 28 years old, but weak, frail, and reportedly impotent. Doctors whispered about sorcery, priests blamed witches, and courtiers debated whether he was even fully human. Maria Anna tried to help him at first, but soon she became his nurse more than his wife. There would be no children, no heir, no future. By the time Charles married Maria Anna, his pedigree chart looked more like a spiral than a tree. In 4 generations, the Spanish Habsburgs had married uncle to niece and cousin to cousin again and again. Charles's inbreeding coefficient, a genetic measure of how closely related one's parents are, was higher than that of the child of a brother and sister. His body paid the price, his mind paid the price, and ultimately, so did his empire. Charles II died at age 38. He left no heir. His body was reportedly so decayed that he had only a single testicle and a heart the size of a peppercorn. With his death, the Spanish Habsburg dynasty collapsed. The throne passed to the Bourbon line, sparking the War of the Spanish Succession, a conflict that engulfed Europe, all because a family obsessed with blood purity forgot that blood can poison. Charles II and Maria Anna were married not out of love, but out of royal necessity. But no ceremony, no queen, no prayer could undo the damage done by generations of incestuous ambition. He was the last of his line, and in him the mighty Spanish Empire glimpsed its own mortality. A marriage unconsummated, a crown inherited too many times by the same blood, and a dynasty that, in trying to preserve itself, ensured its own collapse. 4. Napoleon Bonaparte and Marie Louise, the distant cousin's marriage. He crowned himself emperor in a move that stunned all of Europe. She was an Austrian archduchess, young, royal, and reluctantly offered as a gift of peace. They were not strangers, not entirely. Through centuries of Habsburg marriages, they were distant cousins, their bloodlines woven tightly through the same elite tapestry of European royalty. Their union wasn't built on love, it was built on ambition, fear, and dynastic desperation. This is the story of Napoleon Bonaparte and Marie Louise of Austria, a marriage that symbolized the height of imperial power and the cracks beneath it. Born in Corsica to a modest noble family, Napoleon Bonaparte rose through the ranks of the French military during the Revolution. By 1704, he declared himself Emperor of the French, placing the crown on his own head in Notre Dame Cathedral, defying the Pope and centuries of monarchical tradition. He had already married Josephine de Beauharnais, a charming widow older than himself, but after years together, it became clear she couldn't give him a child. For Napoleon, who dreamed of founding a dynasty to rival the Habsburgs, Bourbons, and Romanovs, that was unacceptable. So he made a decision. He divorced Josephine and demanded a new bride, one with a womb, a crown, and a powerful last name. Enter Marie Louise of Austria. She was just 18 years old. Daughter of Emperor Francis VII, Marie Louise had grown up hearing horror stories about Napoleon, the man who had defeated her country, humiliated her father, and redrawn the map of Europe. She despised him, but she had no choice. In 1810, under immense pressure, she agreed to marry the man her people considered a tyrant. It was a political offering, an attempt to placate France and protect Austria. And to make matters more awkward, through several Habsburg lines, Napoleon and Marie-Louise were distant cousins, united by centuries of royal intermarriage. The ceremony was opulent. France rejoiced. Napoleon finally had his empress. But behind the marble columns and silken gowns, this was not a marriage of hearts. Marie-Louise wrote privately, "I will do my duty, but I do not love him." To his credit, Napoleon tried to win her affection. He was attentive, generous, even romantic. And in 1811, their union produced the one thing he had long desired, a son. The King of Rome was born, Napoleon's heir, the beginning, he believed, of a new imperial dynasty. But fate had other plans. Within 3 years, Napoleon's empire began to unravel. The failed invasion of Russia in 1812 bled France of men and morale. The Sixth Coalition formed. Defeats mounted. By 1814, Napoleon was forced to abdicate. He was exiled to the island of Elba. Marie-Louise, now empress of a fallen empire, was urged by her father to never return to Napoleon. She obeyed. She took their son and fled to Austria, where he would die young, sickly, and forgotten. Napoleon, meanwhile, would return for one final blaze of glory, the 100 Days, only to be defeated at Waterloo. Marie-Louise never saw him again. Their marriage had started as a treaty. It ended as an abandonment. She was his distant cousin, his empress, and the mother of his heir, but never truly his partner. Napoleon wanted a legacy carved in marble, blood, and conquest. Instead, he died alone on a remote island. And his son, his symbol of dynasty, died at 21, with no crown and no throne. The marriage of Napoleon and Marie-Louise was the high point of imperial spectacle, but it was also a cautionary tale. Even emperors cannot command love, and even the blood of empire runs cold. 5. Tsar Nicholas II and Alexandra Feodorovna, the first cousins once removed's marriage. He was Russia's last emperor, destined to watch his dynasty crumble. She was a German princess raised on English tea and Victorian values. They were bound by devotion, torn apart by politics, and united by blood. First cousins once removed, they came from the same royal web spun by Queen Victoria, a union of love shadowed by disease, mysticism, and revolution. This is the tragic marriage of Tsar Nicholas II of Russia and Alexandra Feodorovna, Empress of Russia, also known as Alix of Hesse or Alix, a bond as intimate as it was fatal. Nicholas Romanov was born into splendor. Heir to the Russian Empire, one of the largest empires in human history, he was groomed in tradition, duty, and the iron certainty of autocracy. But Nicholas was gentle, introspective, and poorly prepared for rule. His father, Tsar Alexander III, towered over him in strength and expectation. At the heart of Nicholas's world was a shy, delicate girl from Germany, Alix of Hesse, granddaughter of Queen Victoria, Empress of Britain. They met as teenagers, and over the years their bond deepened into something unbreakable. Ever since that evening I have been unable to forget you, Nicholas wrote in 1889. Your letters are like rays of sunshine to my soul, Alix replied. But their love faced a major obstacle: religion. To marry Nicholas, Alix would have to convert from Lutheranism to Russian Orthodoxy, a profound and daunting step, and the Russian court viewed her with suspicion. She was German, serious, and lacked the charm expected of a future Tsarina. Still, Nicholas was firm. He would not marry anyone else. And when his father died in 1894, Nicholas ascended the throne. A month later, despite court resistance, he married Alex. She took the name Alexandra Feodorovna and stepped into the whirlwind of Russian imperial life. Nicholas and Alexandra had 4 daughters before finally producing a long-awaited son in 1904, Alexei, heir to the Russian throne. But joy quickly turned to despair. Alexei was born with hemophilia, the same deadly blood disorder that had haunted Queen Victoria's descendants. Through Alexandra, the disease entered the Romanov line. Alexei's slightest injury could lead to uncontrollable internal bleeding. The royal family lived in constant terror. Every stumble was a potential death sentence. Alexandra's desperation turned spiritual, and then supernatural. She placed her trust in a wandering Siberian mystic, Grigory Rasputin. To the court, he was a drunk and a fraud, but to Alexandra, he was a healer. And when Alexei nearly died from a hemorrhage, it was Rasputin who seemingly stopped the bleeding, securing Alexandra's unwavering belief. She became isolated, paranoid, and obsessed with keeping Rasputin close. Court politics soured. The people whispered of corruption, of seduction, of witchcraft. But Alexandra didn't care. She loved her husband, she adored her son, and she would protect them at any cost. By 1917, Russia was collapsing under the weight of war, famine, and fury. The people blamed Alexandra's German roots, her connection to Rasputin, her influence over Nicholas. That spring, revolution erupted. Nicholas was forced to abdicate. The imperial family was placed under house arrest, and a year later, executed in a basement by Bolsheviks. Nicholas and Alexandra died side by side, still holding hands. They loved each other truly. They were faithful to the end. But their marriage, between cousins tied by blood, brought more than love into the Romanov line. It brought hemophilia, isolation, and the fatal belief that divine right could weather any storm. Nicholas ruled the Russian Empire, but in placing loyalty to family above all else, he lost it all: a cousin marriage, a tragic love, and the fall of a dynasty. 6. Cleopatra and Ptolemy XIII, a sibling marriage. She is remembered as one of history's most powerful and seductive rulers. He was a boy king, barely a teenager, forced into a throne he could not hold. They ruled together, but only on paper. Their union was more than unnatural. It was imperial law, brother and sister, married, crowned, and thrust into a world of power struggles and political warfare. This is the story of Cleopatra VII and Ptolemy XIII, the royal siblings of Egypt, wed not by choice, but by dynastic decree. A sibling marriage forged in the final days of Egypt's independence, a kingdom on the brink, and a queen who would change history forever. Egypt at the time of Cleopatra was no longer ruled by native pharaohs. It was under the control of the Ptolemaic dynasty, a Greek Macedonian royal family, descended from one of Alexander the Great's generals, Ptolemy I. For nearly 300 years, the Ptolemies ruled Egypt like gods, and to keep their bloodline divine, they adopted the ancient pharaonic custom of sibling marriage. This was not taboo in their world. It was tradition. Cleopatra VII, born around 69 BCE, was brilliant, multilingual, and politically ruthless from a young age. When her father, Ptolemy XII, died in 51 BCE, he left the throne to Cleopatra and her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII, then just 10 years old. Their co-rule came with one condition: they were to be married. Yes, sister and brother, queen and king, wife and child husband. The marriage was ceremonial, meant to preserve the Ptolemaic dynasty's divine authority. But in reality, Cleopatra was never going to share power. She was nearly a decade older, educated, charismatic, and determined to rule alone. Ptolemy XIII, just a boy, became a pawn for palace factions who hated Cleopatra's growing independence. The court split in two, one side backing the queen, the other propping up her puppet king brother. It didn't take long before sibling rivalry turned into civil war. By 48 BCE, Cleopatra had been forced to flee the palace, stripped of her titles and influence, but she wasn't done. That same year, fate delivered her a secret weapon. Julius Caesar, newly arrived in Egypt, chasing his rival Pompey. Cleopatra, famously, had herself smuggled into Caesar's quarters, some say rolled up in a rug, and won him over with her intelligence, charm, and political savvy. They became lovers, and with Caesar's Roman legions behind her, Cleopatra marched against her own brother-husband. The result was catastrophic for Ptolemy XIII. In the chaos of civil war, Ptolemy XIII drowned while fleeing the battle. He was just 15 years old. Their marriage had never been consummated. It was a legal fiction, one that ended in betrayal and bloodshed. Cleopatra reclaimed the throne, now co-ruling with a younger brother, Ptolemy XIV, who would later mysteriously die as well. But by then, Cleopatra was unstoppable. She had Caesar, she had Rome's protection, and Egypt was hers. The marriage of Cleopatra and Ptolemy XIII was not about love. It wasn't even about family. It was about power, dynastic obsession, and a desperate attempt to preserve an empire with bloodlines, not merit. But even in a world where gods married their sisters, Cleopatra would not be ruled. She rose above the custom that bound her, turned a brother-husband into a footnote, and wrote her own legacy, not as a wife or a queen, but as Cleopatra, the last pharaoh of Egypt. They were royal and they were related. Some were first cousins, others uncle and niece. One was brother to the bride. They married not for love, but for blood. To preserve dynasties, they sacrificed futures. To protect lineages, they risked madness. History is built on these marriages, thrones held together not by passion, but by pedigree. And sometimes it was that very bloodline that brought them down. If you found this journey through history as moving as we did, please like the video, subscribe for more powerful stories, and share your reflections in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Until next time, stay curious, stay thoughtful, and keep history alive.